All right. My name is Seph Zdarko. For those of you who have not heard of me, I've been in this industry for about 20 years on both the buy side and the sell side. Today I'm going to talk about data powers programmatic, but what powers the data. It'll get a little bit technical, but I think it should be a review for some of you. It'll be educational for others, but I think it'll be entertaining. Like I said, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I'm an engineer by trade. I've been at Performix, DoubleClick, Google, 12-fold, and now at QuantCast for about 4 years, where I do all things data, modeling, attribution related around product strategy and partnerships. And it's a pretty fun job. I think it's pretty cool. And this presentation actually started from a whiteboarding session that I did with clients and with internal product folks. And people said, well, let's put it into something where you can actually present. So this is my attempt at that. Like I said, it should be, I think it's hopefully not too technical, even though it talks about technical things, but I think you'll enjoy it. So it's a lot of data I'm going to throw at you, so let's get started. There we go. So because of the fact that it's a little bit technical, I'm going to start off with some foundational truths around some definitions that I think sometimes people get confused about. Then I'm going to jump into the meat of the presentation, which is how data moves from online to offline, how modeling works, and how data decays. Then I'm going to jump into how data is measured online. And then I'll finish it up with some case studies, something that we did over the last 4 years that I think it's kind of good to round it up with some hard data and facts to throw at you at the end. So let's jump into it. So foundational truths. All of you are aware of offline and online, right? These are two different areas that we deal with. Offline is us, it's people, it's Bob Jones, it's Sarah Smith, it's people, right? We have personally identifiable, that's who we are, that's where we live. Online, not so much, right? It's devices, it's mobile phones, it's desktops, it's tablets, it's anonymous. And in this online, offline world, we have different attributes that we can use for modeling and to identify ourselves. And in the offline world, we have personally identifiable information, right? There's a lot of companies that live in this space. This is our name. This is really your name and any other attributes you have. So your email, your phone number, your address. It could be even an address you had back at college. All they need is any of those two things, and they can map out everywhere you've lived, every address, every phone number. All of that can be mapped out. It's actually kind of spooky how much information is available about us as individuals in the offline world. But it's all there forever because we generally don't change our name. And that persistent ID is stable. It's static. It doesn't change. So it allows people to move and transfer and push data to different places, right? Actually, our personal information is kind of like the village bicycle. Everybody uses it. Online is very different. Online is transient. It's volatile, right? It's these mobile devices that I think, on average, what is it? A mobile device is 6 to 18 months is the average. Or 9 months or something like that. It changes so rapidly through browsers and new cookies and sessions that it's not something that you can really nail down. And it is anonymous, right? We can't model an individual. We have to model the device that the individual sits behind. And so online is very different than it is on offline. And this is going to be a common theme throughout the presentation today, is this juxtaposition and relationship between online and offline data. So keep that in mind. First party and third party data. A lot of people use this and there's second party data. Look, well, all we have to pay attention to is first party and third. First party is you collect it. It's your data from your perspective. It is usually deterministic, but you own first party data. There's third party data, which is someone else's, right? Someone else collects it. It can be deterministic or probabilistic, but the concept is you buy or take third party data from someone else. And then deterministic versus probabilistic. I definitely hear these being misused in different articles and in different venues, but to keep it very simple, deterministic is the truth, or at least as close to the truth as you can legally and technically get. Deterministic usually has accuracy if it's collected properly, but can lack scale because anyone that says, I only use deterministic data, or that's all I target with, I generally say they're usually either misinformed or they're being lied to, because it is very hard to make purely deterministic data scale, especially for targeting. So this is where probabilistic comes in. Probabilistic is generally using that deterministic first-party data to infer and project probabilities that other devices or other things or people might also be in that cohort or category. And probabilistic data generally has scale, but can be less accurate, though it really depends on the quality of modeling that goes into that probabilistic models, which we will talk about later. Okay, so let's talk about how data moves. Let's go back to the online-offline world that we live in. So in the offline world, this is what we talked about as PII, right? These are attributes that you can model with. Now, these are the companies we've all heard of. This is the Axiom, the Newstars, the Datalogics, the Experians, or the one that's been most recently in news, Equifax, right? There's all kinds of companies that live in this offline space. And they're all billion-dollar-plus companies, and they've all been in this industry for decades. And they deal with our personal information. And they all started originally, like Axiom was the banking relationships, right? Experian, Equifax were the credit bureaus. Newstar was the telcos. And they started with some registration database about us as a population. And they all have a very similar business model now, although they trade data. Just like when you go to a grocery store and you give your name and your phone number, right? That data is being attached to your PII, and the things that you buy, whether it's a credit card or at the grocery store, get passed and sold to a lot of these companies, including even Datalogics, which is probably the newest one on the block, which didn't really have a registration database but bought all that data. And they are now competitive in that offline space as a modeling company. And what these companies do is they take some form of deterministic data from a client, typically some type of a seed. Might be converters, it could be corduroy pants buyers or macaroni and cheese eaters or some people that buy my widget X product. And you go to these companies and you say, hey, I'd like to learn more about tell me about the people that are buying my product. And they say, sure, here is some insights. This is the overlap of all the attributes we have on the general population and the things you should know about people that are buying your widget X. They're this age and income and gender, and they buy macaroni and cheese, and they drive this car, and they do all these things, right? And they sell this data to those companies. And in addition to that, the companies say, the advertisers say, well, I'd like to find more people that could be in market for my widget X. Can you help me find other people that are similar to the people that are buying my stuff? And they say, sure, we'll build a probabilistic model off of your deterministic data. And here is a segment X of people that are most likely that look like the people that are buying your product. And this is, like I said, these are big dollars for the last several decades. But where do you think all of these companies are projecting growth is going to be? Right? They've been doing really well in the offline space, but they're looking over to online, right? Because they've exhausted this. This works, by the way. This, whether you sell a catalog or a phone call or direct mail, I mean, this has been a very well-established business. But online is where consumers are spending most of their time. We're consuming things online, so they want to bring this data of these projections, these probabilistic models online, so that we can reach them not just through their mailbox, but also on their devices. And so one of the things in this diagram is that little dotted line in between. That is the anonymization zone, the DMZ. This is where PII shall not pass, because on the online world, this is anonymous, right? So you can't just say, hey, I want to target Bob Smith on his mobile device. It doesn't work that way. So there are a whole host of companies that live in this space in between. We call them onboarding companies. You've probably heard of some of this. This is iBehavior, Newstar, Datalogics, or the one that most people have heard of is probably LiveRamp. And they live in this space where they help port data from PII to an anonymous device. Okay? And they do this through relationships we have with websites. So not like Bank of America or places that, these are well-established companies that make money in other ways, but generally it's websites that you sign up for free and you give them some of your PII. This is companies like dating services that are for free, or the one that's more relevant to me because I'm married with 3 children is electronic invitations. So I'm sure most of you have gotten an Evite in your life at some point. I personally don't get that many of them, but my kids do. And I get an invite through email that says, hey, Gavin is invited to a birthday party 3 weeks from now at the park, and it's in the afternoon. And you'll find that there's never quite enough information to be able to determine whether you can go or your kids can go. And what do you have to do? You have to click on that email. And that email is PII. It's got my name and my email address. Okay? And when I click on that, it opens up a browser or an app. And at that moment, when that happens, a cookie and an ID gets dropped, and literally thousands of attributes from the offline world get associated or refreshed and appended to that device. So a lot of these companies, people think, oh, they make all their money from advertising, but they actually make a good portion of money from this onboarding. And they don't just work with one service, they work with all of them. And there's more and more of these companies that are coming on board. The problem with this onboarding is that it isn't very efficient. So it's gotten better over the years, but we're still at only about 20 to 50% at best of the data from the offline that makes it to the online world. It used to be a lot worse, okay? And this is because we don't spend that much time on these services. It doesn't touch the whole population. So to get all that data to the other side, it's not the most efficient thing, which most people don't realize. And so what's happened in the past is that because only a certain amount of it made over, so a company would say, or an advertiser would say, okay, I've got my 10 million people offline, I want to target them online, and the data finally makes it over, and they say, how come there's only 2 million? This doesn't make sense. And back then, 5, 8 years ago, there wasn't really a lot of awareness of measurement or accuracy. It was sort of just make it available. Scale was the big thing. In fact, I was actually at a conference of one of these data onboarders 2 years ago, and one of senior executive at one of these big data brokers in the offline world actually said on stage, people aren't concerned about accuracy. What they're concerned about is scale, and that's what we focus on as a company. And I remember hearing that going, oh my gosh, I can't believe this senior executive said he's not worried about accuracy. You should be worried about both. But what a lot of these companies do, not all of them, but one of the strategies of bringing over so that it looks like these two segments are equal, because marketers often don't understand, they just say, how come the data online is so small, is they'll overmodel the data on the offline side. So they make it a bigger, right? They just make it looser and not quite as accurate. So that when they port it over, you actually get the 10 million. So they'll say, oh, well, now I've got 10 million in my segment offline, which works great, and I've got great attribution and measurement, and now it's online, and there's about 10 million. That makes sense to me. But the reality is it was kind of not very good data. And this is part of the reason why I think it's got a bad rap online, is there's a lot of expansion techniques, whether they happen offline or online, that puffs the data back up, which doesn't really make it very accurate. It just makes it less accurate. Though there is a better way. And this companies like Quantcast that are pioneering ways of bringing the data from the offline to the online and doing the modeling online. Okay, we're not the only ones that are out there, but what we do is we say, hey, instead of giving us that model data, let's just bring over that deterministic seed data. And even if it's only about half, that's okay, because from our perspective, we would rather have a smaller, more accurate sample or seed than a larger one that's weaker. Because what we do is we use the attributes that we have online. We don't have access to PII, we're a purely online company, but we have HTTP. These are the withdrawals and deposits of information that each of us do on our devices, right? I deposit some information, I would like to see this, or I click on a link, and then what comes back is information that I consume. The content we consume. This is the HTTP. This is the signal that we use for modeling online, the attributes. It's not the products you buy or the cars you drive. It is the things that you consume. And what we found is that content consumption, those patterns of content consumption, are very, very telling about who we are as individuals, right? So like you and I might be the same age and income and gender and have 3 kids and live on the same block and own the same car and both eat a lot of macaroni and cheese, but that's not nearly as telling about your and my beliefs and interests right now at this moment in time, more so than the fact that we might have gone to the same 3 sites this morning and another 2 this afternoon. The content that we consume, both consciously and subconsciously, is very telling about who we are as individuals, our beliefs and interests, right? It's almost like a window into people's inner soul and psyche of what we find interesting at that moment. And it's arguably that in a lot of situations can be better for modeling certain behaviors and attributes that are very fickle, that change over time. And so we leverage all of this data and we produce the same type of segment. But it's not watered down, it's not lost, and it's real time. It's something called live data, which I'll talk to in a little bit. So what is modeling? Because it's the same in both of those scenarios. You could literally take a data scientist from one of those offline companies and put them on in an online company, and while there would be a little bit of ramp up, it's the same type of Bayesian inference. It's a seed plus attributes. That's the basic function of modeling. And the higher quality that seed, the better. You're actually better off having a smaller seed that's higher quality than a diluted seed, right? So you want, bigger is better, but you want to make sure it's highly accurate. And the same thing with attributes. You want as accurate and as large as you can get. And size really does matter when you're talking about attributes, because you have to combine what is that cohort and what are all the things they do that are different from everyone else. And then what you do is you take all of that and you make a prediction and you say, okay, based off of all the things that cohort does, can we predict that other people that aren't in that cohort, aren't in that seed, might also have a high probability of sharing enough characteristics that they would also likely be them. So this could be as simple as age and gender, right? I have kids, and my gut says I browse the web a little bit differently than someone without kids. My age, my income bracket, all of these things, whether or not I'm in market for a new iPhone because it just launched, which changed a week ago. All of these things affect the way I consume content, and we tap into that. And so that model then gets ranked in terms of every device on the internet. Literally, we have scores for every device that's in your pocket. We're lucky because we're the second largest analytics platform out there behind Google Analytics. And so we see everybody in the US, everyone in the world, except for maybe pockets of China, but we see everyone on average every few minutes that you access the web, you touch something that Quantcast has seen. And we can take that data into account, and we can rank in real time all of these different devices as to their probability of being in a seed. And what we do is we take that high relevancy and we say, okay, that's our lookalike segment. Okay? And where I mentioned, there are other ways of doing this. There are a lot of companies out there that do data and modeling. So you'll hear a lot of companies saying, oh, we model the data, we have predictive modeling, we do expansion. But you need to understand there are different ways of doing this. Just because you use the vocabulary and the terminology to say you can do it doesn't mean you necessarily can do it better than someone else. The quality of modeling matters. In the old days, and this is when I was back at Aggregate Knowledge, before DMP was even called the DMP, we literally would build lookalike models off of the client's converters, and we would overlap it, a Venn diagram with third-party segments, and we would say, hey, there's a reasonable overlap with segment X, Y, and Z. Let's just target X, Y, and Z. Now, thankfully, a lot of companies don't do this anymore, although I'm not surprised probably a few do, but that's not the right way to do it. A better way, better but still not great, is the proper way of modeling using a series of attributes to actually make a stronger prediction. But a lot of these companies don't use very much data. Okay, and the analogy I would use here is sort of like, I'll pick on you again, sir, is, we've never really met, I don't know much about you, but I can look at you, what you're wearing, your age, your income, I can guess whether you have children, I can probably guess what kind of music you're into. I can make an infinite number of predictions about you as an individual. That doesn't mean they're going to be accurate, but I can make a ton of predictions. Now, your best friend can make those same predictions that I can make. And the only difference between my predictions and their predictions, because we both have the same modeling engine, the only difference is they have a crap ton more data about you than I do. And so their predictions are going to be way more accurate, because your best friend sees you and knows a lot more things about you than I do. That's the only difference. And this is where data really does matter. So just because someone says they can do it doesn't mean they have the ability and capabilities to produce something that's truly accurate. The other way that a lot of companies will do this is they'll just use third-party data, because they don't have a lot of those attributes, so they'll use the third-party model data. But this is modeling off of model data. Again, it's an infer off of an infer. It just degrades it even more. So you have to be careful with what's out there. So let's talk about live data. As I mentioned, the cookies are moving up and down, right? Literally, as devices are consuming the web, their probability of being in a segment, certainly like in market for an iPhone, can go up and down drastically in real time, certainly throughout the day, certainly within a number of weeks. And that live data is what gets pumped into our predictive models that go into our bidding, right? So in real time, we're making decisions on whether or not this person is the right time to serve the ad, when, and who, and all of that. This is that concept of live data. But why does that matter? Okay, so live data is important because most of the data that is out there is not live, meaning it gets cut off from its predictions. So in the offline world, again, very established marketplace, that data of segment X gets onboarded, okay, and it gets brought over to the onboarder. And let's say half of it makes over and there isn't any expansion that happens there, but we're sitting with that data in an onboarder. Now, for privacy reasons, that data usually is not activated or bid on in that platform. They usually have to move that to a secondary platform because they handle PII. They don't want to be responsible for targeting ads because there's just a whole bunch of compliance and everything that is associated with that. So what they do is they move that over to another platform, typically a DMP. All right, now you guys have probably heard this before. There's something called a server-to-server or an S2S or cookie stapling or cookie matching. These are, well, back in the day we used to just do a redirect. Basically, we just pixel all of our users, but it took forever to get that across because not everybody sees the internet to the same capacity. So now we do something called the server-to-server cookie stapling, which is essentially, it is one company exposing the other company, or platform if you will, to, hey, this is my user X7159, and they go, oh great, this is our user 23941. And one or both of the companies store that information, and they do that for the next one, and the next one, and the next one, until they literally have all of their users that they see associated with each other's IDs. And then once they have that, that gets stored offline, and then they can pass all of these attributes. So you can then say, okay, here are all of my segment X buyers or users or males and females or whatever it might be, all the different attributes you have, and here are the associated IDs with each of them. And I literally can email an Excel file or upload a CSV into an FTP. There's multiple ways of getting that data over. But the problem is that not every platform sees everybody on the internet. Okay, Quantcast is lucky, and it was actually fun when I first came over here 4 years ago discovering all of this, but we do see everyone, and I was shocked by how few people a lot of the platforms see. We see a spread from anywhere from 30% coverage to about 80% coverage. On average, it's about 60%. So you'll notice in this diagram that 60% means that a little over half of the data actually makes it to the next platform. And the problem is that it's not just one platform, right? Typically it goes to a DMP, and then it goes to a DSP, and sometimes it goes multiple hops. We're getting better in the industry today, but you have to realize every time your data hops, it gets smaller and smaller, less and less of it makes it to the end. Okay? This is real. It's getting better, but it's still a major problem in terms of the quality of data. This is where we talk about dead data. There's one other aspect, which is time decay. Okay, now this is going to be some data. This is directional. Don't make any projections off this, but it's directionally accurate, and I think it illustrates the point here, which is there's a cookie clock that's out there, a device cookie clock, and about a third of the devices, right? They last about 90 plus days. Okay, this is me. I don't delete cookies. I don't change my browsers. I'm pretty simple. I probably don't even upgrade the operating system very frequently. But I've been around for a long time. My device is actually pretty stable, the IDs that I have. And so what that means, there's a lot of data about me. I'm actually a very expensive person to advertise to because so many companies have information about me. And I'm okay with that because it's a trade-off that I give. And the nice thing is I don't get the dancing belly fat ads or things like that because I'm too expensive. But that's about a third of the people that are out there, the devices. Okay. Another third is about 7 to 30 days. Okay, now this is a distribution curve, but the mean is probably in around that range. And then another third is about 0 to 3 days. Okay, doesn't last very long. So you can imagine now you've got this cookie clock, which is ticking away. So as time goes, so does the cookies. So does the information. So in this scenario, where we have pushed data from one platform to the other, this doesn't happen instantaneously. This typically takes about 3 to 5 days. Okay, we've seen it take weeks, or pardon me, more than a week in some scenarios. But platforms are working to try to get this done within 24 hours because the big guys, the Googles and the Facebooks are demanding this. They want it within 24 hours because they realize this is a problem. And so a lot of platforms are working on that 24-hour transfer. But that's them getting the data to the platform. It still takes 24, 48, 72 hours for them to get it in the platform before you can actually activate on it. And every step of the way, same thing. Boom, gets smaller and smaller. Data decays very, very quickly online. And this is something you need to be aware of, right? Dead data, tick, 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 starts going down in terms of value. And what this means to you, the marketer, is that just because a piece of data has brand X on it and it's sitting in some platform does not mean that it's the same quality that you're used to in the offline world. In fact, it doesn't even mean it's the same quality that you're used to in this platform versus that platform, right? There are different refresh rates for all of this data and different hops and different resellers and middlemen along that way. And for every one of those stops and for every day that it takes, you are losing the value of that data. And so what happens, which we're not aware of, which we need to become aware of and start asking more questions about, is that data being refreshed? How often? And is it being modeled? Is it being expanded? Are they fluffing it up with cross-device expansion or other types of lookalike modeling, right? So that it appears that it's still active. So these are things we need to be aware of. So now let's talk about measure, how you measure this data and how it's measured. It's precisely or specifically about panel versus predictive measurement. Now, I'm sure most of you kind of are aware of what a panel is, right? This is Nielsen, this is ComScore, this is IRI, this is Kantar. There's lots of Ipsos, Toluna, Research Now, Lucid, all these companies that live and operate panels in the offline world. But let's talk about the typical panels like a Nielsen or a ComScore. And what they do is they intentionally go out and they select individuals that have a distribution across the population, across all the different segments that are out there, right? Age, income, gender, religion, all that. And they try to get that cohort to be as representative of the population as they can. And if there are biases, that's okay. At least they know about them. They can model for those. But they take that distribution, and that becomes the panel. And they are generally paid, right? They're compensated in some way for being a part of that panel. And you can ask them questions, and they fill out long forms. And that panel exists in the offline world. And it gets brought online. Now, for measurement purposes, there are privacy rules that are different for targeting versus measurement, and they have the stated consent of these users, so they don't need onboarders to bring this on. So it's generally one-to-one because they give explicit permission to be tracked online. And that panel represents, hopefully, the same distribution of all of those individuals in line. And this cloud is sort of, it's my representation of the population. And that cloud now has all of, this is the internet, all of those panelists distributed across. And the idea here is that you can take any sample that you want to measure, let's say a site, and you can say, okay, well, how much, what is the male-female ratio of site X? And as long as there's enough overlap on the panel, you can infer. It is still a probability, right? You are inferring that because a small percentage of the site has this demographic makeup, we can project that the rest of the site likely has that. And it's fairly accurate. This has been proven and it works. But the problem is with the panel, the size of your panel matters as well as the accuracy, but as you get smaller and smaller things that you're going to measure, you get less and less panel coverage. And so because it's an inference, because it's still probability, the accuracy of that probability, the statistical significance gets less and less to the point that you get to a site that doesn't really have an overlap and it can't really be used. And I think we're all familiar with these types of scenarios where the big sites work and the little sites don't. It's the same thing with a campaign. You tag a campaign, and you need to have it run long enough to be able to get enough information to get something statistically significant to measure, right? So you can get down to a partner, you get down to a creative, maybe it's not going to be that accurate. You get down to actual clickers, forget about it, right? You're not going to be able to get any kind of measure, and it's just too small. So let's talk about predictive measurement, okay? And this is really the genesis of Quantcast as a company. It was, our founder Conrad went out and interviewed a lot of marketers and said, how does this online marketing thing work? And they all explained the pain points of measurement. And he said, hey, there's a better way to do this. We can use that same panel. Not the specific same panel, but we can use the same type of panel data of deterministic raw data of individuals in the offline world. And we are very particular about the quality of that data. If people answer questions wrong, we kick them out of the panel. But we make sure that that is highly accurate. Okay, and we bring that panel online, and instead of then using that to overlap on the things we're measuring, what we do is we extract the seeds. We say, all right, let's extract the males 18 to 24, and let's look at them, and let's see what makes them unique. What are the things that they do? And can we actually make a predictive model so that we can score the entire internet, every device, as to their probability of being a male 18 to 24? Okay, so we have now a score, and literally we have scores on everyone's devices here. And we say, let's extract all the seeds from that panel, and let's build predictive models for all of those different attributes, whether it's age, income, gender, children in the household, race, macaroni and cheese buyers, widget X. It doesn't matter. We have all of these different predictions. Okay, and then we take those predictive scores on all the devices, and so instead of now having a panel that is distributed, we literally we have a score on the entire internet for all of these different segments. So now, when you're out measuring, you take your site X. Here's the percentage of being a male. We have a probability. Okay, it's still probabilistic, but it's slightly different than direct panel measurement. We can go down to the section. We can go down to the author, the article. Right? We can go down to, theoretically, we can go down to a single impression. But for privacy reasons, we don't. We cap it out at about 100. Okay? Because if you get too low, you can actually then, technically you could get PII and you could, match things up. So we certainly don't want that to happen. So we cap it at about 100. But theoretically, it can go all the way down to the single level of granularity. But this allows us then to provide data and information on any level site and on any level within a campaign and at any point. Just a single day of campaign and we can give you information because it only takes as long as you've got 100 impressions or more so, then we're going to have information to be able to give you directional input. So the question is, what's better, panel or predictive? Now, I don't necessarily know that I have an answer. I think they are both better in certain scenarios. Okay, I think panel measurement is arguably better when you are measuring large things. It's a single step of inference, and if you have a good panel and you've got enough overlap, you're going to have a really accurate result. But the problem with direct panel measurement is that it decays relatively fast. Right? As you get smaller or more granular, it starts to drop off. It becomes less statistically significant to the point that it can't even be done. Okay? And predictive measurement is pretty even across. Now, what that delta is, I don't know. Now, I have ideas, and I've actually have proposals of how I think we should measure this, and I would like to do that, but I haven't been given the budget yet. Hopefully at some point, maybe you guys should all encourage us to spend for these studies, because I think it'd be really interesting to actually quantify what that delta is between those two. But this is for you to decide. I don't think it's a one or the other. I think it's an and, right? It's really a combination of the tools that you have that you should employ. Just like modeling offline and modeling online, you shouldn't use one or the other. You should actually use a combination of both, right? You as the marketer should use all of the tools that you have at your disposal to be as most effective as possible. All right, so let's dig into some results. So I was not given budget to do that study. But I was given budget to do some other things when I got here at QuantCast. Everybody said our demographics should be really accurate, and I said, okay, I believe that technically, but I want to test it. And so I reached out to a friend, Dave Smith, who runs Media Smith. It's an independent agency, a large agency out in San Francisco, hopefully some of you have heard of. And I said to him, hey, I've got this theory about how data moves and the accuracy and what segments should look like online, and I would like someone to test it. Are you willing, if I hire you as an agency, to do this independently? So you put your name behind it, you do it, you make sure that, that it's statistically significant, put all the rigor behind it. Are you willing to do it? And he said, yeah, because it was an interesting experiment. And so we carried this out in 2014, and we were surprised. And then we just redid it again at the end of last year. And I thought this was only going to be tens of thousands of dollars. It ended up being hundreds. So that's probably why they're not letting me do more tests. But it was good results. It was surprising to me. So let me show some of those results to you. So QuantCast was the most accurate, which was not surprising to me. I actually expected that. And by the way, this was one of the first times that that I was aware when we pushed our data into this third-party DSP, because we couldn't run it on ours. We wanted to have it in an open DSP, so all the data was in the same platform. And that was when I first realized kind of that data passage rates. But what's interesting here is the volatility across all the different partners. And this actually wasn't even all of the partners that were in the study. We had about 15 of them, and a handful of them, we couldn't even get enough impressions to have it measured. And we used Nielsen and ComScore. It was Nielsen OCR, now it's DAR, but we used them to measure the accuracy of the demographics. And some of the partners, we couldn't even get enough impressions. We went up to a $10 bid, right? We started on a whitelist, then we did run of the internet. We just trying to get more impressions, and we couldn't even get enough to hit the minimums. And we did this in the UK as well, and it was even worse. I mean, the results there were even worse. It's getting better, but this was in the US. And what I think is interesting to point out is notice that at the end, that's the control. That's basically the run of internet. We just randomly targeted the internet. So for example, for males 18 to 24, what's important to note here is that some of the data providers are barely better than control. So what that means, if you were going to try to target 18 to 24-year-olds, you'd literally be better off randomly targeting the internet than you would by buying the data. Okay? This isn't to scare you and say it's all bad. It's to say, just pay attention. It's not all equal, right? And again, it might be because that data was passed from 3 different platforms. I don't know. Here was the results in 2016. Now, they're better. They're all better, right? The tide, the rising waters raises all boats. So everybody got better, which is great, right? I think as an industry, we're moving and getting better. But there's still a lot of variability in terms of the accuracy of all the partners. So what are you supposed to do with all this? What does it all mean? Well, don't ever assume. Don't assume that the data that sits in one platform is the same as the other platform. Don't assume that if it has brand X over here that it's the same as brand X over there. It doesn't mean that brand X isn't as good. It just means they get moved around and it gets massaged and modeled a lot. So seek out the truth as best you can. It's important to really ask a lot of questions, right? How did the data get there? Where was it modeled? Where did it come from? Did it generate online? Was it offline? How often is it refreshed? How many times has it been moved? Do you have a direct relationship? How fresh, and then how are you measuring it? All of these things are important to be able to understand. If we don't ask the questions, we won't get there. And my belief is that efficiency and transparency are like gravity. We as an industry are moving in that direction and things are getting better. But only through education and awareness and discussion do we get there. So that's it. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions. With a name like Seph Zdarko, I'm pretty easy to find. So please reach out, connect. I'd love to geek out on this stuff. I've got a talk later on Thursday on attribution, but hopefully you found this educational, informative, and entertaining. Thanks. Sure. If anyone has any questions, please. That was a lot of information, so hopefully you took something away from it. Awesome.